Hello, everybody. My name is Ratnos, and I've missed a little bit of midnight news on this channel. It was MDI week, last couple weeks. There was China MDI and then MDI Global Finals, so I was pretty busy with that. And then actually next week I'm going to be gone as well. I'm going to be in Brazil for CCXP, which is a convention down there. So if you're in the area, come say hi. But all that said, that meant that my usual plan of reading out all the patch notes and the midnight news as it comes out sort of fell apart. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to collect everything I could remember from the last couple of weeks, including the release date, but also Boltslop, all those other hot topics over the last couple of weeks that we've had on the beta, and I'll talk about them in this video. And then I'm not sure when the next midnight video on this channel might be, maybe sometime in December. I might make some player housing content when that comes out onto live. I'm not 100% sure. The plans are up in the air, but either way, you can use the chapters down below to navigate between these different things. So let's start off with the release date, because this is pretty big. It comes with, some important ramifications. And I think this is probably a couple weeks later than people would have guessed with the, Winds of Mysterious Fortune that was on some of the calendars. People often extrapolate with that. And that would have predicted this to be about 2 weeks earlier. But yeah, so midnight 3/2, this is the American date convention. So this is March 2nd is when Midnight is going to launch. And that's when Midnight launches, not when the early access, the 3-day early access happens. So this is a Monday, March 2nd. And if you want to play the weekend before, then you need to buy the Epic Edition to get the early access. And yeah, typically you're not going to be missing any relevant player power if you don't do that. But of course, you're going to be watching everybody having fun playing Midnight while you don't. So, that sucks. But yeah, if you are, not available that weekend, you're strapped for cash, you don't want to pay for the Epic Edition, any of those reasons, you really aren't going to be missing anything huge for your player power level side of things, because typically for those first, week and a half, even usually there's not going to be access to delves beyond, tier 3 or whatever delves, and dungeons beyond heroic dungeons, maybe mythic zeros, right? Those kind of things. But they usually are going to gate all of the actual seasonal stuff pretty well into the future. So if you're looking for time to take off to play Midnight, if you want to rush the leveling, do all that kind of stuff, have a lot of fun with that, that's great. You just do it on launch. But if you're looking for, being a raider, a high-end M pluser, any of that kind of stuff, you might instead be looking at something like maybe the 17th of March is pretty likely to be when the raid comes out. And even that'll probably be Heroic Week would be my guess. My guess for when Mythic Raid and full M plus comes out would probably be the 24th of March. But a lot of that is still up in the air. We know that this first tier is going to have a weird release schedule with the different raids, the 3 different raids coming out at different times. So if you are somebody who's booking time off and you can afford to wait a little bit to book time off, unless you just want to hit the release and the leveling side of things, we probably still don't know the actual best time off to take for, getting the actual raids and dungeons when the full season comes out. But yeah, 17th to 24th is probably best guess for that. Okay, we also have player housing. So player housing is going to come out on retail very soon now. The 2nd is when player housing hits retail, but there are some important caveats. So the Night Elf and Blood Elf exteriors aren't available yet. So it's just going to be human and orc housing. So still some limitations before the full release. And even that full release is, that's still pretty limited. So housing, it's going to be one of those things where the number of customization options is part of the feature, and that's not all there yet, but it will be coming out, onto live with the 0.2.7 patch. And if you're interested, this is a tool called WoW Audit, and it's got a lot of different, spreadsheet stuff and guild management things. There's a Patreon with some paid features, but one of the features that it has is if you are interested in, for your guild, assigning the plots in the neighborhoods. If you want to do a neighborhood like that, my guild, we've started using this for both the Alliance and the Horde zones, because you can have both. You can have a house in both, and people requesting the houses they want, and the officers can approve and deny them. I know there's been some guilds have been doing drafts and stuff like that to let you pick your plots that way. But yeah, guild neighborhoods are coming. In addition to guild neighborhoods, there are public neighborhoods and also charter neighborhoods. You can learn more about housing. I'm not going to do a full rehash of how exactly the feature works, but I just wanted to call out, if you are a guild and you're interested in divvying up the housing rather than just having it be a, who doesn't work on Tuesday and can quickly claim a plot type thing, then this might be something that you're interested in. Okay, other news on the add-on front. So there's been an update from WeakAuras, because basically over the past few months, I guess, or weeks of beta, Blizzard has been slowly giving some number of features back that were originally culled from what add-ons could look at on the first build. And there was some speculation that, like, oh, maybe WeakAuras, they spoke too soon when they said they weren't going to develop, and now that Blizzard's giving them back all this power. And WeakAuras has released a statement that basically says, no, we're not going to do that. So, yeah, we currently don't have a plan to release a WeakAuras version for Midnight. And the basic idea is that, so yes, WeakAuras as an add-on could still continue to exist, and it could still do some things. But one of the core things that WeakAuras does, from the perspective of the WeakAuras people, the people that make it, is let people have access to and customize how their characters, resources and cooldowns look. And basically, WeakAuras and add-ons in general aren't going to be able to do that in the future. So they summarize it by saying there are 3 largely unrelated changes happening simultaneously. The first change disrupts automated assignment auras by limiting add-ons' ability to send and receive in-combat chat messages. This is, I think, the big change that people look at as, fight WeakAuras being killed. And this is not... The WeakAuras would continue to exist even if this change went through. This change alone only impacts chat add-ons and encounter assignment auras. If that were the extent of the changes, most add-ons would remain unaffected. The second change targets Mythic Plus by hiding NPC identities, buffs and debuffs, and spellcast for nameplates, which is the core selling point of nameplate add-ons. This is the main thing that's going to make it so that, nameplate add-ons might exist into Midnight, but much of their functionality is being carved out, right? And is nameplate add-ons will purely be, what shape and size do you want your nameplates to be, rather than what do you want them to do. They won't be able to do anything that the base UI nameplates can't already do with their important cast highlighting and all that stuff that is now Blizzard default. The third change is hiding your own personal combat state from add-ons. This is the change that affects most add-ons like WeakAuras, but also LVUI and console port. And yeah, this is something where basically Blizzard says add-ons should not be able to provide a competitive advantage in combat, and WeakAuras says, okay, well, without this, what's the point? Without this, we are basically a platform for, achievement hunting and outdoor world collecting and little quality of life things, right? Tweaking your auction house to always be toggled to the current expansion stuff, right? Like those little kind of micro add-ons, WeakAuras would exist only as really a platform for those, because hiding your own personal combat state from add-ons is the main thing that stops most WeakAuras from working, right? WeakAuras that display information about your character. There is stuff that you will be able to do that still displays that information to you in a customizable way, but for the most part, it's not going to be add-ons, right? You're going to be setting that up with either centralizing your action bars, or by using Blizzard's cooldown manager, which has more power than the add-ons will, right? The cooldown manager will be able to do things that a WeakAura couldn't, because the way that secret values work is obfuscated from the add-ons being able to see it. And I think that this is accurate from Blizzard's side that if this change weren't made, there would still be power to be gained by using this, right? You think about stuff like the Arcane Barrage Reminder WeakAura, that's something that uses this information, right? It does logic based off of a bunch of information about your character's combat state, right? Your character's stacks of various buffs, the number of arcane charges you have, the amount of mana that you have, your most recent cast, those kinds of things, your current cast. That WeakAura operates off of that information, and Blizzard's basically looking at it, they're like, okay, we don't want any of this to ever be something that you can download for an advantage to your character. We don't want any part of the skill of playing WoW to be downloading the correct add-ons, understanding how they work, using the good ones and being aware of them as they come out. We don't want that to be a power level increase. But a casualty of this is that then weak auras that, display the weak auras that are, I would say, more benign that Blizzard wouldn't target also rely on that information. It's not just the Arcane Barrage weak aura, but if you're trying to kill that, you basically have to kill all of the other stuff as well. So basically, yeah, WeakAuras is making this post because a lot of people are sort of misinformed that because of the recent trend from Blizzard of being like, okay, we're going to put back this functionality, we're going to put back this functionality. People think, okay, that means WeakAuras can come back, and the answer is no. WeakAuras still can't do the main thing that they want to do, and they could still exist if they wanted to as a platform for micro add-ons, but they don't want to do that. And that's the fair choice for them. So if you want little tweak add-ons, those are going to be add-ons again and not WeakAuras, unless somebody makes a new micro add-on, platform add-on of some kind, which maybe they will in Midnight, who knows. There was also a recent Wowhead post that contains a paraphrase claim: if WeakAuras existed, this mechanic could not exist. So this was the last boss of the raid, which is not supposed to be testable, but for some reason was testable, and which is Lura. So you may remember this if you've done, I believe it was Seed of the Triumvirate. I think this is the same Naru from that. Spoilers. But we have a mechanic here where basically the boss is going to show you 4 symbols in order, and the order of these symbols will be random from pull to pull, right? And then it will mark 4 players with those symbols, and then those players, the boss will then do a rotating laser, and the laser needs to hit those symbols in that order, right? It needs to hit the symbols in the order of the cast, right? The way that it initially showed it. And this is a heroic mechanic. The mythic mechanic actually, at least by the Dungeon Journal, has an element of like Star Augur to it, where multiple people will get the same marker, and they need to collide with the people with the same marker and either do it in the order of the symbols shown by the boss, or maybe still get hit in the order shown by the boss in some way. I don't know. Obviously, this hasn't been tested at all on Mythic. But yeah, this mechanic, I think, has jumped out as one of the ones where it's like, is this a mechanic that couldn't exist without WeakAuras? Is this a mechanic that would get solved in some meaningful way by WeakAuras? And I think the answer there is, it does genuinely depend on how it was coded with, how, like, for instance, if this was a private aura, what would that look like? And what exactly could a weak aura tell you to do with this? Could a weak aura tell you, go to circle if you got the circle marker? Maybe somebody would have to manually place circle. My suspicion with the way that this mechanic works is that if this mechanic was hard, you would place 4 world markers, and there would just be somebody in the raid responsible for placing these 4 world markers, and they would place them in 4 positions based on the order that the boss does it, and then the people would go stand there. But at that point, is it better to just use your brains and rely on your 20 raiders' brains for this? I don't know. Ultimately, this is a heroic mechanic, not a mythic mechanic as well. A lot of the difficulty of these mechanics is based on the hecticness of the things they overlap with, and the nature of it being a heroic mechanic as well means it's unlikely to require that degree of precision, that degree of systematization, and we know the mythic mechanic is different anyways. So what would this look like? Is there a way that this would be, if they put this mechanic in the game with weak auras existing, what could those weak auras do with it? And I think it's kind of hard to say, but my suspicion is that it probably could be, if the aura was obfuscated from players, right? If it was a private aura, I think it would be pretty much the same as if it was a Midnight version where there's no weak auras existing for this. But I'm not 100% sure. I think that people espousing a great deal of confidence one way or the other about how this mechanic would be solved, if you're not in one of the top few guilds in the world that usually come up with the best way to solve this, or sometimes disagreeing ways, right? Sometimes Liquid and Echo will come up with a disagreeing way to solve a mechanic. You can look at a mechanic like Blasphemy on Anduin, for instance, which Liquid basically solved with a system that was brainpower reliant, and Echo solved with a spaceship UI that would pop up. And the guilds disagreed on that. Most people ended up using the Liquid solution long term because it was easier to set up. But yeah, I think outside of those guilds, I'm not confident. I'm not confident that people can be really sure what this would look like. But is this the sort of design space that has opened up to Blizzard? Can they do a mechanic like this with more time between the cast, because there's not some WeakAura, some macro WeakAura interaction that you would press that would solve this for you? It's hard to say, because on its face value, this mechanic, it's not rocket science, right? It's you yell out the symbols as they show up, and then you go in that order. To the extent that it is rocket science, it would be done by one person placing world markers, right? And then for the other 19 people in the raid, it would be very much not rocket science, depending on how you wanted to solve that. But yeah, basically, WeakAuras called out that post in their post and said there's a recent Wild post that contains the claim that if WeakAuras existed, this mechanic could not exist. Hopefully the explanation above clarifies that WeakAuras could still be allowed to track personal combat states without interfering with encounters, and thus that statement is flawed. So basically WeakAuras is saying, if you're using the creation of this mechanic to justify all three of these changes that Blizzard is making, you should know that only the first one of these needs to get made to the extent that this claim is true, and the second and third ones are irrelevant to that. And I think that to some extent that's accurate. On the other hand, there is also always concern that, basically whatever Blizzard leaves add-ons to be able to do, we might backdoor some of the old functionality into whatever they keep, right? So even if there's functionality that we didn't in the past use to track certain fight-related things, there might be sneaky backdoor ways that we can do it by tracking personal combat state in some way, by tracking NPC identities and stuff. We could maybe do some, basically, clever programmers that come up with a way that are like, oh, well, this condition's only ever true in this phase of the fight, therefore we can use this to, bootstrap up a fight WeakAura in some way. Those sorts of things are, I think, one of the benefits from Blizzard's perspective of killing almost all of it and then building back in, giving back some small bits of functionality that are the most requested from players for customization purposes. So anyways, that's what's going on a little bit with the WeakAuras situation. In addition, we are still seeing evolution on basically the cooldown manager, external defensive tracking. There's this weird thing where there's an external defensive frame that is still pretty primordial here on beta. It's got some things, tracking things like Life Cocoon, but not Rallying Cry, and not giving you filtering, rearranging power. And for some reason, it's not part of the cooldown manager, although it seems like it really should be. These should be part of the same, package. And it's strange that it's sort of its own little add-on thing. But yeah, this is something that's coming. So the ability to track externals on you is something that is being worked on. I would say in general, one of the big things that Blizzard has not given on that would help a lot is some degree of either buff filtering or buff pruning when it comes to being able to track our own buffs, because they've called this out as being one of the problems with the way that buffs work in the game is that you have 20 different buffs, of which 0 to 3 of them are relevant, and it's hard to tell. If you're trying to look at the top right of your screen to track relevant information about you, you're going to see your Vantis rune, you're going to see your food buffs, you're going to see Mark of the Wild, and so if you instead wanted to just put all your buffs in the middle of your screen without some good way of filtering those, it's really hard to have that be useful. So unless Blizzard can commit to curating a list themselves of relevant buffs, I think, which would be, if they could do that, that would be good. I think that's definitely one of the big things that would really improve the no add-on future, is if there was a well-configured from Blizzard sort of, it doesn't even necessarily need to be a whitelist of buffs to track, but a blacklist of ones that like, hey, I really don't need to know whether I have my food buff or not in the combat area. It's useful to know whether I have food buff. I check that between pulls, but I don't need mid-combat. If I want to put some buffs near the middle of my screen, food buff is not one of the ones that needs to be there. So something like that from Blizzard would, I think, go a really long way towards helping this further. There's also been some changes to interrupt philosophy. So there's been this discussion about Boltslop, and there's also a Reddit thread of, is the bench podcast spreading misinformation? Which, the answer is always yes, but in this particular case, you maybe could make an argument that they were more accurate than inaccurate. And the basic idea is, hey, you're no longer going to be able to track your group's interrupt CDs. Therefore, Mythic Plus needs to look different. Mythic Plus needs to have a different texture than dungeons like Priory of the Sacred Flame, where if you're trying to do Priory of the Sacred Flame without knowing your group's interrupt cooldowns, and you're going to a higher keystone level than, say, plus 12, you're going to be in for a very, very bad time. And there's basically been this debate among, I would say, believers and doubters about whether or not Blizzard is actually successfully accomplishing the changes to the dungeons that would be required to make the game fun in a world without having access to your group's interrupt CDs. And I think that, so this Wowhead post basically goes through and says, okay, look, here's the things happening to casters in Midnight. There are fewer enemy casters overall. They have longer cast and cooldown times on important interruptible abilities, and bolters nerfed massively. So all major trash abilities that are important to kick have been standardized to have 25 or more seconds of cooldown and 4 seconds or more of cast time, which that's a really long time, right? 4-second cast time, 25-second cooldown means you could assign each person to each kick, and you don't need a kick rotation on any non-bolt cast, right? On any important cast. And also, if you did want to YOLO it a little bit more, you have longer to react to that cast going off. Even if you're in voice and you want to say, oh, somebody kicked that, 4+ seconds is long enough to actually successfully do that, potentially. It does still, of course, run the risk of, kind of no matter how long the cast time is, if everybody in your group has the same thought process of, I'm going to wait to kick until 1 second left, that is how you overlap kicks, how multiple people try and kick the same thing. So you do, in a no voice situation, you kind of need a little bit more. You do still need to do some work to avoid that, although, of course, the longer the cast time, it still gets less likely that that's going to happen. But also bolters. So bolters are enemies that cast Frostbolt, Firebolt, Surge, right? Like these sorts of little abilities. Any kind of... the reason they're called bolters is because they're Shadow Bolt, Arcane Bolt, Frostbolt. And basically, they've looked at these different dungeons and compared the Seed of the Triumvirate, the new season from Midnight versus the current season in War Within, and the damage has been nerfed by about 20 to 25% of a lot of these bolts relative to health pools. Now, this is a little bit... it's a little bit tough to make the direct comparison here because we don't, the numbers are still changing on beta a lot more. But I would say that there are a lot of bolts where nerfing them by 20 to 25%, I'm not sure it is enough to be a massive nerf to bolters. Like if you think about Priory, and if you ran a Priory and the bolts did, 75 to 80% of the damage they currently do, I'm not sure that would necessarily change the texture of the dungeon massively in terms of like how bad it is to let one of those bolts go through. I think that's one of those things where the context matters, because the thing about that is how many bolters are there in dungeons. There's new tech from Blizzard about having it be that those don't target the same person, like multiple bolters don't try and target the same person back to back as much in Midnight, so that will go a long way. And also, if you think about a dungeon like Priory, the reason the bolt kills you is that you were just hit by a Sacred Toll as well, right? So if there's not another ability that's bringing you super low, then the bolt can do more damage without being as lethal. So there are a lot of variables here simultaneously. But yeah, I would say that the size of the damage on the bolt nerf is not as big of a nerf. And it's with a nerf of this size, it's very important that they also accomplish, the cast time nerfs, the number of bolters in the pack nerf, the other damage at the same time nerf, all of those things. If they want to be really safe, I would say hit it again. Hit them with another 25%, and then I think we're moving to a world where the bolts, because I think the bolts, if you did a Priory and the bolts hit half as hard as they currently do, you would still notice those, and they would still be relevant and important casts. It'd be good to kick. But yeah, that I think is it's a move in a good direction, but this alone isn't a big enough change, and they are going to rely on landing all of the other changes. There's been a concern over Boltslop in Midnight, and the word doesn't have a clear definition. That's one of the joys of of language. You could come up with new words. It's like mole people, right? Mole people, Boltslop. You just make up this word, and then the joy of it is that it means to each person a different thing, and then you can get in arguments with people about it. And the thing is, you disagree about the definition of the word, and that's the core of the argument. But it takes 30 minutes of yelling at each other to discover that. So that's the joy there. But yeah, so bolters are less common, more spread out. They spread their targeting across the party. This is, I think, one of the huge nerfs. I mentioned that earlier, but there is now that tech where bolters won't target the same person back to back as much. The bolts deal less damage, they have longer casts, and they'll be locked out of casting for longer when kicked, because all kicks now have 2 seconds longer of spell school lockout. So yeah, I think that this, if you were looking at the nerf just on the less damage side, this is not a large enough nerf to fix the Boltslop. And if you're looking at it in terms of bolters are less common and more spread out, of course, this is a dungeon by dungeon thing. So they ran a breakdown of the different dungeons as well, and looked at which enemies have bolts and how many are there, and what's the maximum per pack. And the answer is it varies from dungeon to dungeon. There are a lot of dungeons that have very few bolters. And there's dungeons like Pit of Saron, which actually received a midweek nerf and still is by far the boltiest dungeon, right? You can see by far the most enemies that do bolts. So I think this does go to show, the core changes here, in particular the targeting logic change, that's going to go a long way. But it is also going to still matter per dungeon. If you look at Boltslop in War Within Season 3, Priory is an outlier, and it went unfixed for 2 seasons. Well, they nerfed it, but they never successfully nerfed it enough to make the dungeon fun across 2 seasons. So the changes that Blizzard are making here are not going to be enough to make bolts fun in Midnight. They're going to help. It's going to go a long way. But if they don't further nerf Pit of Saron is going to be the Priory of next season. So Blizzard still needs to do better than they did in Priory to avoid there being a Boltslop dungeon in Midnight. But one thing's for sure, we've got a great new term that I'm going to get a great deal of enjoyment out of using anytime there is a Boltsloppy dungeon. My life is dramatically better than before we'd coined the term Boltslop. It makes me happy just to have a stupid new brain rot term for this. So that's always a win. But yeah, that's the state of Boltslop in Midnight. Okay, we've also seen some further updates to the in-game damage meter, which the last time I made a video wasn't even testable yet. But yeah, basically, damage meters are coming in-game. You're not going to be able to use an add-on really for it. You might be able to reskin it a little bit with an add-on, but fundamentally, this is going to be one of those things where the Blizzard damage meter will have access to information that add-ons simply will not have access to. And so this is something we consider to be in heavy ongoing development, and they wanted it to be available for testing. And there's a lot of stuff that is still going to be coming in to the damage meters. Custom handling for spells that have multiple ticks, like Whirlwind or Immo Aura, into a single damage event. That kind of stuff that Warcraft Logs uses, they're going to be rolling into the damage meters over the next couple of weeks. And there's also a lot of self-damage stuff, a lot of bugs and weird behavior that exist with the damage meters right now that they're working on. I personally am I'm pretty confident that 98% of these things are going to get fixed. And my concerns with the Blizzard damage meters are not that it's going to have, these sorts of glaring misattributions of damage to, different things. I wouldn't be surprised if there's randomly some, demo lock pet that is bugged for a couple months when Midnight comes out. I wouldn't be surprised if AUG is never properly handled, because it's hard to properly handle AUG. That's something that, is very hard to attribute the damage to them properly from all of the different damage that they are bringing to the group. So those are things that I wouldn't be surprised sort of make it to live and are kind of unfixable. But I think that they will catch up to details pretty easily in terms of like making the basic functionality of that good. However, the displays that are available, I think, are certainly not going to reach the level of customization that Details has. If you right-click on Details, you get 40 different options. And I think it's unrealistic to expect that Blizzard are going to it's not just that they'll be able to, but I don't think they're going to want to provide that much functionality with their damage meter. So they're going to improve the ability of seeing total damage and DPS. And I think hopefully some customization that lets people show neither, either, or both next to their bars, that's something that definitely should exist. And the version that came out initially didn't have that. That kind of sucked. Again, that's an easy thing for them to fix. Enemy damage taken, really powerful breakdown tool. I think that's also something that will be really nice. And we're also working on death recap functionality because it's important to have a clear understanding of what caused a death. And I think this, to me, is the big thing. I was thinking that they weren't going to provide death recap functionality. In fact, on a recent episode of the Pod EC, I speculated that this was not coming. And with that coming, I think that's going to be the main functionality that I was skeptical might not come, will come to the damage meter. So basically, if they land all of these different things that they're planning to land, I think we're going to have 99% of the use cases that Details had will be covered by the in-game damage meters. And that shouldn't be a huge problem. The remaining 1%, probably the kind of things that you usually would look at in logs anyways. And, you know, there were these windows and details that were often inaccurate anyways, and you'd want to use logs to see anyways. So yeah, I think all of that should be fine. You know, stuff like the interrupts, the CC breaks, for instance, notoriously, it's a useful, but not always the most accurate anyways, window there. So yeah, I would say damage meters, you know, provided that they get all of this done before the expansion launch, looks like it's going to have the functionality I was hoping for here, which is good. I think it's reasonable to be concerned that they might not have, so the amount of time before the expansion comes out, right? It's like we're on the Thanksgiving break, and then there's going to be a couple of weeks of time, and then Christmas break, and then a month, and then like pre-patch, and then expansion, right? And so a lot of this potentially needs to get done by pre-patch, or, you know, will fall in priority to the other more on fire things that happen when Midnight actually comes out. But my suspicion is that this is going to be something that will make it in, I think like 80-20, this is mostly in its final form by the time Midnight actually comes out. And then, you know, a small set of improvements maybe over the first patch will be all that it needs. But my guess is that this is going to mostly work, which, yeah, we'll have to, again, it's just a guess. One of those things where actually knowing what's going on behind the scenes is hard, but that's my read on damage meters. Nameplates, on the other hand, I'm a little bit more skeptical of. Blizzard, over the past 20 years, have never really been able to make nameplates look good. And, you know, the plater functionality has been really important for making nameplates work well. Blizzard have made some posts that say, hey, we're making further improvements. You know, let us know what you think. Please keep sharing your feedback here. But this one is a lot more, it's a lot less binary, right? Like matching details functionality is something that's a lot easier to directly compare. Whereas every pull not looking like, you know, garbage nameplate situation, right? Doing these things that you know, look kind of ugly with how the nameplates are moving around and floating in weird ways and, you know, becoming decoupled from the mob that they're associated with. That's something that I think is a lot harder to... It's a lot harder to land, and it's also just a lot harder to test all the different use cases, right? Test all the different polls where this is going to go. And frankly, this is just an area that I think Blizzard have tried to make the default nameplates less bad a lot over the last 20 years and have failed. And one of the initial changes of the Midnight Beta, Midnight Alpha even, was the deletion of a bunch of CVARs, which are character variables that Plater used to make the nameplates actually look good and to give you the control over them. So it seems like this is an area where they're flailing a little bit more. I hope I'm wrong about that. Again, this is not authoritative. This is just my prediction, but my guess is that nameplates are going to suck more than the damage meters will when the game actually goes live here. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope they actually... Because the thing is, there've been a lot of patch notes where it's like, we've improved nameplates, and then you log in and you look and it's like, okay, these still suck. These are still doing all these things that are annoying. And there's sort of two different things with nameplates. One is the sort of just default behavior of how they move and flow on the screen. And that has kind of always been bad with Blizzard default nameplates. And they have yet to ship a version that, you know, passes the eye test on, not even, like, this is not even the super worst case for it, right? But if you look at, like, the first pull of Algathar Academy, which that's not even that agreed. Like, it's not like it's somebody who's, it's not like it's, oh, these top 10% players are pulling that whole, like that whole room. You just always pull that whole room, right? Like, unless you're going really slow, you're fighting 30 enemies in that room at the same time. It's kind of unavoidable. So that is, yeah, something that I'm a little bit more skeptical of. And then nameplates also contain one of my biggest sort of wish list items, which is I really, really hope we can move to a world where there's less of this sort of useless text that I need to ignore here. So like if we look here, right, we have famished, broken, Shadowguard champion, famished, broken, famished, broken, famished, broken. Like I really am going to miss the ability to just see broken champion instead of famished, broken, Shadowguard champion. Like I am really sad about losing the ability to remove just the first name of these nameplates. And yeah, I know it feels like I'm gonna lose this one. I don't know. This might be just my thing, but man, that's one of the things that I'm saddest about going into Midnight. Speaking of things that I'm sad about going into Midnight, there's two other wishlist items I'd like to flag. One is the Pathfinder. So for those who don't know, the Pathfinder achievement is this achievement you can earn fairly early into the expansion, and historically flying was gated behind this. And now you don't need to do this to get flying. You can just always fly, but it's dragon riding that you can always do. And you need to earn the Pathfinder achievement to get the sort of stable flying, right? The old flying, to get access to that in the Midnight Zones. And I think this is a really unnecessary feature now. I think the Pathfinder, they should decouple. You should just be able to use stable flying if you want to over dragon riding. In the past, there was this concern that old flying sort of rendered the artist's work and the expansion designer's work irrelevant because you no longer needed to care about the verticality and the design of the zones. And then when dragon riding came out, they were like, oh, cool. Dragon riding, you'd care about those things again, so we can give this to you without needing to earn the Pathfinder achievement anymore. But I think it's pretty short-sighted because, dragon riding is like 3 times faster than stable flying. So the only people who would use stable flying now are people that really hate dragon riding or potentially for accessibility reasons want to use stable flying, for motion sickness reasons, any of those sorts of things that people get with the sky riding. So I think it's really a mistake to lock those people out of being able to fly and force them to use the dragon flying. I think nobody is, using it to all the people that you'd worry about trivializing the art and skipping over all of the landscaping are people that are going to use skywriting anyways because it's faster, right? They're the power users that are not going to travel at 30% speed just to be able to. I mean, I guess sometimes sometimes we would if we wanted to go AFK and do that thing where you set your character in a direction, hit auto run, and then try and come back in 3 minutes when you're going to be over the right spot to be. Sometimes you'd use that, I guess, but I don't think that's enough of a reason to do this. So I think that they really should reconsider the Pathfinder being the prerequisite for unlocking non-skywriting. And if they need a cool achievement or cool thing for Pathfinder, maybe like a cool piece of decor, a map of the Midnight Zones that you could put in your house that you get for Pathfinder. That could be cool. They could retroactively do that for all the old Pathfinders as well. And then just make it so that once you have skywriting in an area, you also can do stable flying as well. And yeah, I guess you could put like a speed increase on it, maybe on Pathfinder. I don't know. Either way, it feels unnecessarily punishing to a small subset of the player base that aren't the problem from their perspective of the people that are, that would skip over and miss out the benefit of enjoying all the nice new zones they've made. Another change I really hope they reconsider is just the way that Decor multiples work. Right now, if you want multiple pieces of Decor, you need to collect the second and beyond pieces of Decor. And I think this is just really unfortunate, and I hope it's something that I also hope they'll reconsider. It's tough because it seems like there were sort of a lot of systems are being built off of this, but I don't think it's too late. I think they could still fix this, and it would make the game a lot better. So it seems like Blizzard's basic idea is they want it to be that, if you want to get multiple chairs, you need to get multiple copies of that chair. This has some benefits. It has benefits for the profession crafted pieces, right? Where it's like, hey, if we want this profession craft to be a valuable craft and people need 20 of it rather than just one, that's 20 times the demand. So that does help the profession economy. And being, a crafter that learns how to make a certain piece of decor will have more value, especially if it's one that people want in multiples. And it also creates a gold sink where, for a lot of these pieces of decor, it'll run you tens of thousands of gold to buy all the pieces you might want, and to buy the multiples of them. And so from Blizzard's perspective, if they're looking for a gold sink, this can be a good way to do that. But I think the downsides outweigh those upsides, where when I look at collecting decor from a collecting point of view, I think the way that Transmog works, where it's like, hey, I've earned this, I've checked this off my list, I own this piece, I can use it now, that feels really good. And if instead it's a case of like, oh, I need to get, like, I could in theory use a large number of these, therefore, that sort of diminishes the excitement and the joy of collecting that piece of decor, right? Like, you haven't really checked it off your list. You've checked 1 out of X, where, if I had 4 copies of this, would that be enough? Probably 8, 10. I guess probably, but maybe I'd want to use 20. But am I going to collect 20 copies of every decor? No. So that seems really, it seems like it's really going to cut into the joy, not just on the decorating side, but also on the collecting side of decor in Midnight. I hope I'm wrong with this. This is one of those things where we'll get some more data points about whether this sucks when people are actually making their houses on 12 or 11.2.7 when that comes out. But I do want to say that just the way that has worked has, since the beginning, I've been skeptical of it, and I've hardened my skepticism rather than been convinced by the Blizzard perspective on that one. If you are interested, though, there has been some favorable moves on Transmog pricing. So there was some pretty controversial high prices of Transmog. They're basically changing how Transmog works in Midnight to give you the ability to have different Transmog activate under different circumstances and different situations, which is pretty cool. It came with some pretty high costs for unlocking all these different Transmog slots and then changing which Transmogs are associated with which slots. They've nerfed the price there, although I will still say, again, I don't think that that's an area that should be a huge gold sink. I think if you are a player that wants to use all 50 of the Transmog slots now and actually wants to swap between them, I don't think those are players that we need to be further taxing the gold of every time they want to make a new outfit. I think that putting the friction there is on those players. Like, I don't know. Again, I feel like that there's a degree of joy of Transmog that will go away with putting a gold tax there, especially because it's only going to hit the most Transmog-y players. But those are some of the players that love WoW the most, and hitting them with a tax every time they do that change is, I believe, unnecessary. So I think they should not just reduce those costs further, but just take them out. Make transmogging free, make it free to change all your mogs and stuff. And then if you want to put some gold sinks in, just put a cute hat for 100,000 gold on a vendor somewhere in Quel'Thalas, and bang, all that gold sink value is recouped. So that's my perspective on sort of the stinginess of some of the gold sink system philosophy that Blizzard is coming in with transmogs and decor. I think those are short-sighted and punishing to players that oftentimes those players are ones that don't have huge amounts of gold, and even if they would be willing to buy WoW tokens, the enjoyment of that system goes down a lot when it's costing you money to do it. Okay, we also have raid testing. So oftentimes this channel has featured raid testing videos. Unfortunately, this was MDI China was during this time. MDI rehearsal for Global Finals was during this time, and then I'm going to be in Brazil during this time for the Brazil thing. So all of these testings are ones that I personally am not going to be able to attend. So no raid testing content on this channel this time. I'm going to try and make it up to you. I'm going to try and make it up to you with heroic guides for all the bosses this tier. That's my plan. Historically, I would only do the end bosses, but I'm going to try and do some timely heroic and mythic guides to all the bosses when they actually go live. But yeah, no raid testing content on this channel. So if you want that, you'll have to search elsewhere. I'm sure that many of the great content creators out there do have some boss testing footage that you can take a look at if you are interested in that. And with that, we've made it through all of the topics that I had today. Hope you've enjoyed this video. I know it sort of rambled. We went over a lot of things, some informational, some editorial, but I wanted to just get all of my thoughts in one place, and I didn't want to divide them into multiple videos because it's easier to just ramble. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. See you in the next one. Bye.